It's kinda obvious, but different dice systems allow for different kinds of games in your TTRPGs. For D20 systems such as Dungeons & Dragons 5e or Mutants and Mastermind, the D20 system allows for variance, but also leads to scenarios where players succeed when they otherwise shouldn't. Also, the system of a D20 leans to being very cut and dry. When you roll something, you simply roll and you succeed or fail. Next is the Percentile dice system. This system gives a grand overview for players. When you get a character sheet that has a percentile dice system, you can grasp how a character is good or bad at something, and it's a simple percentile roll. So for some, that's a great visual. Or for those who like to roll with a set of different dice. For example, let's say you're playing kids and bikes. You don't add a large bonus or an attribute like a +3 or a +4, you simply choose a different set of dice if you're more skilled at something or not as skilled at something. For example, instead of rolling a d6, you might roll a d12 or a d20 because you are better at that task. And I think all of these dice systems have their merits, but I do think there is one system that allows for a complexity of rolls. You can combine success, failure, triumph, and despair all in one or two rolls via this system. I'm talking about the beautiful Star Wars FFG / Genesys system and their narrative dice system. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about why I think the Star Wars FFG narrative dice system is perfect, or, well, my preferred system for rolling and playing in games. But I'm sure you might be wondering, what is Star Wars FFG / Genesys / Edge Studios? First off, Star Wars Edge Studios / FFG is a TTRPG that is set in the Star Wars universe, and Genesys is the system generic version of that system. Firstly, I need to make this clear. When I say Star Wars FFG / Genesys, I'm talking about the narrative dice system and many of the rules and mechanics that come with it. So from here on in, I'll just be referring to it as Edge Studios, FFG, or Genesys. Star Wars FFG was published in 2012 with cross-compatible games with each other, with them being separated to themed experiences. The crux of these games are separated into 3 collections. The first is the Edge of Empire games, where you play the scum and villainy of the Star Wars world. Bounty hunters, slicers, mercs, and criminals. You know, think of Han Solo or Boba Fett. Next is Age of Rebellion. You play as rebel soldiers and freedom fighters fighting against the fascist tyranny of the Galactic Empire. The third book is the Force and Destiny books, where you play as Force sensitives set during the Empire's rule. And also, there are other books, such as the Force Awakens books, which take place in the sequel trilogy, or the Rise of the Separatists and Collapse of the Republic, which are set during the Clone Wars. Furthermore, there's also, like I said before, a generic system called Genesys, which uses all the same narrative dice system. But this video isn't about FFG or really even about running FFG or Genesys. It's specifically about its narrative dice system. And I think the narrative dice system allows for complexity and a variety of outcomes due to the large swath of things that can and might happen in your TTRPG. And that starts off by explaining what each of the symbols mean and the complexity of these rolls and how they look in-game. So first, let's talk about the positive dice and the negative dice that establish the system. Positive dice, as the word implies, are used to improve the players' or allied NPCs' odds of successfully completing a task or achieving a beneficial side effect. Let's look at the boost dice, aka blue 6-sided dice. Boost dice give special advantages that are generated through luck, chance, and advantageous actions. These are the opposite of a setback dice. Ability dice, these are the green 8-sided dice. They represent a character's aptitude or skill used when attempting a skill check. Finally is the proficiency dice, a yellow 12-sided dice. These represent innate ability or training in a skill. These are used when a character or allied NPC attempt a skill check using a trained skill. Next are the negative dice. There's the setback dice, a black 6-sided dice. This is where certain complications or minor obstacles are thrown to the players. They're relatively minor conditions that impair or hinder a character. It could be terrain or insufficient resources that cause a setback dice. Next is the difficulty dice. These represent inherent challenge or complexity of a task. They're the opposite of an ability dice, and they look like a purple 8-sided dice. Finally is the challenge dice. The challenge dice is a 12-sided red dice. It represents the most extreme adversity usually used during daunting or extremely dangerous situations. It's used by trained elites or prepared opponents or situations. Next, let's talk about the dice results, or the symbols that you might see on your dice. First is the success symbol. This determines whether you fail or succeed. The more success symbols you have, the better chance you are of succeeding. This is cancelled out by a failure symbol. A failure symbol is critical to determining a skill's success or failure. It's the opposite of, well, a success. Long story short, if you roll more successes than you do failures, then you succeed. If you roll more failures than successes, then you fail. Next is the advantage symbol. This indicates an opportunity for a positive side effect. This is cancelled out by threat. A threat symbol is fueled for negative consequences for one's actions. So, you can succeed while generating threats. See how it gets a little more complex? Next is the triumph symbol. This indicates a significant boon or an extremely beneficial outcome. And a triumph symbol can count as success and also be cancelled out by a failure symbol. A triumph can trigger things like a critical injury or a fantastical result defined by environment, equipment, or creative play. And the opposite of a triumph symbol is a despair, where significant bane or detrimental outcomes happen to you. These often trigger negative effects, critical injuries, and only appear on your red dice. So, what does this mean? You can have rolls that have both successes, threats, and a despair. You can have a roll where it's only a triumph and a whole lot of failures. You can also have a roll where you have only advantages and only that. You can have a roll where it all washes out. And there is a swath of other rolls you can have. For instance, let's look at this dice result from one of my recent Star Wars FFG games. No success was generated, and once everything cancels out, you only have 2 advantages. Meaning, my check does not succeed, but something beneficial does happen from that triumph. In fact, something greatly beneficial to me. While I don't remember the specifics of what I did ask for, it's a conversation between the GM and the players. Y'all get to decide what is this beneficial outcome narratively. Same applies for when you succeed with detrimental failures. In the case of our other player character, they succeed wonderfully. However, they also roll a despair. And this despair could mean several things depending on the roll. In this case, maybe it does damage the starship, or maybe it alerts the people to the whereabouts of said starship. So there's complexity to the rolls that I think no other system can provide, or at the very least, doesn't provide it in such a unique way where players and GMs can have a conversation over what the results might look like with this complexity. However, there are some pretty big downsides to the system as well that I need to bring up. Firstly, this game is not good for these kinds of genres. Gritty realism, pure narrative, precise grid-based combat or hexagonal combat, or highly specialized dungeon crawling games. Genesys and FFG are made for narrative-driven games. There is some strategic combat, and there are a lot of other aspects that I haven't talked about, but if you're looking for something that's really gritty or really technical, or something that is extremely specific in terms of rolling and functionality, then you might want to turn to another game. Also, the dice system is a bit gimmicky, so it can be off-putting for people who are used to percentile dice systems or D20s. That's not talking about the fact that it's also extremely difficult to find physical copies of the narrative dice. Plus, the narrative dice system can be really hard to manage when you get to high EXP thresholds, especially once you get to around the 700 range. So you might be wondering, would I recommend you try this system? Yes, absolutely. If you got to the end of this video, then I highly recommend you try out this system, and I would highly recommend everyone tries it out at least once. Now, does that mean it's the most supported system? No. Is it the most popular? No. But I do think what it offers has something to be said, and I do think the ability to have a conversation about the dice results and the complexity and nuance of these results are really fun, at least for me. What do you think? Do you think the system's all just crap, or do you think it's something really awesome? Let me know down below in the comments section. Speaking of which, there's not a lot of support for this system, at least in terms of finding dice. What if you wanted more support online for running Genesys or Star Wars FFG? Well, I have a video about 50 Discord bots that you might want on your server, and I have several bots over there that might help you play and run your next Star Wars FFG/Genesys TTRPG. And as always, I'm your average everyday queer host, Blurry Disposition. Hope you all have an awesome day. Ciao!